Good afternoon. I would now like to call to order a meeting today for the Allegany County Board of Education, Tuesday, October 12th, 2021 at 5 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Llewellyn will now read closed session summaries for executive sessions held on September 14th.
The Allegany County Board of Education met in closed session on September 14th, 2021 at 4:00 p.m. at the Career Center. The purpose of the closed session was to discuss personnel matters, to consult with legal counsel, and to engage in administrative function. All 5 board members were in attendance and voted to go into closed session. The meeting was closed under the authority of General Provisions Articles Section 3-305B1 and 7. The topics discussed were ethics panel vacancies, administrative job openings, mask policy guidance, and board communication policy.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Fraley, second. Mr. Farrell, all those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. First, on the superintendent's report, Dr. Callbaugh will be recognizing the participants and winner of the Middle School Entrepreneurial Showcase.
Good evening. For the past several years, I've had the opportunity to coordinate the Middle School Entrepreneurial Showcase as part of our middle school financial literacy program. If you've ever watched the show Shark Tank, then you'll know how the showcase works. Students submit a business pitch and present their proposal to a panel of judges. Due to the COVID-19, we had to make some adjustments to that. The students that year participated through a video presentation. Each student or team had 5 to 7 minutes to present their business proposal, and a panel of judges reviewed each entry and used a rubric to score the proposal. The ACPS partners with EverFi, a company that supplies the financial literacy programs at the middle school level, and PNC Bank, which sponsors the EverFi programs. The top prize for the most innovative business pitch is a $100 gift card and a medal, and the other students who submitted a video proposal receive a Chick-fil-A gift card and a certificate of participation. I'm pleased that we have 3 of the students who participated last year with us tonight: Kane Andrick, Ben Dixon, and Lucas Orndorff. The winner of the 21 Middle School Showcase was Lucas Orndorff. He was an 8th grade student from Mount Savage Middle School. The judges made these comments about Lucas's proposal. They said he provided lots of market statistics and identified his competitors. He provided a detailed promotional method, and they liked the demo in the beginning of the video that actually showed Lucas building the product. One judge said, "Love the beginning of the video and enjoy the customer testimonials too." I'd like to congratulate Lucas for that achievement, and I want to thank Mia Cross, Brianne Dietry, Anna Evich from EverFi, and Catherine Clay from PNC Bank for serving as the panel of judges. So I believe that you have an award for the winner and the student participants. Kane is our other student. Oh, nice, nice. And Ben.
Mr. Blank.
Yes, at this time I'd like to welcome Janelle Mayer, from our health officer from the Allegany County Health Department. for a Health Department update.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to give an update on our COVID-19 numbers to start. So today, Allegheny County's COVID case rate is 53.76 cases per 100,000 population, as compared to the Maryland case rate of 17.63 per 100,000 population. So we are at about 3 times the state rate at this point. Our percent positivity is 10.41, and Maryland's percent positivity is 3.88%. Our CDC COVID transmission category remains high, and our percent of population that is fully vaccinated is now at 45.2%, compared to Maryland, which is 65.2%. And then when we look at individuals ages 12 to 17 who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, we are at 29.9%, compared to 63.7% in the state of Maryland as a whole. Those with at least 1 dose who are in the age range of 12 to 17, we're at 36%, so that number has gone up a little bit. And in Maryland, that number is at 73.2%. So as reported last time, we are significantly far behind in our vaccination rates, and our case rates continue to be well above the state average, and that is also true in other counties with low vaccination rates. They are also experiencing high case rates at this time. So the little graph at the bottom, this is our case rate over time. The yellow line is Allegheny County, and the blue line is the state of Maryland as a whole. So you can see our large peak last year, that was in early December, was where we hit our worst point. And you can see that we hit another small peak in September and are starting to come down from that peak at this point. That's what the graph is showing us. Of course, we can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow or next week, but it does look like we are headed downward with our case rate right now. I also wanted to talk a little bit about quarantine options. So this is for students who are close contacts to a case and are symptom-free. The CDC allows for 3 options. So you can do the full 14-day quarantine, you can do a 10-day quarantine, which is considered a shortened quarantine, or a 7-day quarantine with a negative test at day 5 or later. So before this point, we had not allowed for that 7-day option. We are open to allowing that option for students in order to cut their quarantine even by a few days, by 3 days, so they can get back to in-person learning sooner. Other jurisdictions have made this decision as well. On Monday, Anne Arundel County made this decision to allow for the 7-day quarantine option. And we at Allegheny County Health Department are ready to do that as well. We've gotten into the school year. We have our mask requirement in place to try to minimize transmission in the classroom, and I think that is an allowable option at this point.
So for clarification, instead of being quarantined, if I'm a close contact for 11, you can go back on the 11th day. Mm-hmm. Now we're coming back on the 8th day, so it'll be 3 less days. Am I understanding that correctly? That's correct.
So you would be 7 days at home with a negative test at day 5 or later.
But you have to have the negative test, otherwise it's still 10? You have to have the, if you don't have
If your test is positive, then you're isolating for the 10 days.
I mean, if you don't take the test, then...
Right. If you refuse the test, don't want to do the test, then you're 10 days.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And when will that take effect?
We could start that immediately.
I think that's wonderful news. I think one of the biggest complaints we're hearing is that healthy kids are sitting home for those 10, 11 days. I know we have to exercise caution, but I think we are, and I think it's wonderful that we're able now. I appreciate that. Thank you for letting us know that this evening. Are there any other questions? Ms. Fraley?
Also, just for clarification, after the 5th day, they take the test, right? And they have to get
the
negative.
5th day or later.
So the 5th day or later. So
exposure or
you can't take the test immediately after you get quarantined. It doesn't count. You have to take the test the 5th day or later
Right.
And in a lot of cases, if you take that test, it could take 2 days to come back.
That's right. But you would be home for 7 is the minimum day. So you have a couple of days for that test result to come back. And if it does take until the 8th day, you could end up another day at home waiting for your test result. That is possible, yes.
Ms. Frank?
Could you clarify if there's a difference between a fully vaccinated student and one who's not?
Absolutely. So if a fully vaccinated student is a close contact to a case, as long as they're symptom-free, they do not need to quarantine. So obviously that is the best way to minimize how often you have to quarantine, by being fully vaccinated. If you are a close contact to a case and you are not fully vaccinated, then come the 3 options of the 14-day, 10-day, 7-day with a 5-day negative.
Just to clarify, if you are vaccinated and you're symptomatic, can you go on that 5-day?
If you're symptomatic, you should be home and getting tested. So you're waiting your test result.
thing? Okay.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Mayer? You're getting off easy tonight, I
I
think.
know. All right.
Thank
Well,
you very
feel
much.
free. You can always email, or if you have any follow-up items, just let me know.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'll move into our instructional update with Dr. Caldwell on a tutoring update.
Just for clarification, am I just giving the tutoring update at this time, or am I doing all 3 updates?
So you're back to back.
Okay.
So yes, you can go right in. Technically, the virtual learning and quarantine is unfinished business, but once you're finished with tutoring, you can move on to that.
Go on to
We'll
that.
just maybe separate if there's any questions and then move on.
Okay, sounds great. I'll
Do
start
you
with the
mind,
tutoring.
does that microphone go just a little closer to your, there, I think that might help a little bit. Thank
I'll
you.
start with tutoring. Can you hear me okay? All right. Right now, we have just under 200 students currently participating in tutoring. The majority of the students are at the elementary level. We have 111 elementary students. We have offered approximately 140 hours of tutoring services since the beginning of the school year. Just today, we added Friday to the tutoring because we had some parents let us know that Friday was the only day the child was available for tutoring, so we added Friday to tutoring services. We do currently have a wait list for elementary students. We have requests that we have not been able to fill. This past 2 weeks, we have been working with secondary teachers to see if any of them would tutor the elementary students, and we've been successful in a few cases there. But we do have a wait list for elementary at this time. So that really just kind of gives you our tutoring update. We met today to explore other avenues to provide tutoring support for our students, and we'll keep working on being able to fill those requests. Any questions about tutoring? Okay. So I'll move into the next item, which was for the instructional support. At the September board meeting, it was recommended by the board that increased instructional support be provided to students who are absent due to our quarantine. We want to acknowledge and recognize that many of our teachers were already working with their school-based administrators in providing instructional support in a variety of ways. Many of them had already been posting segments of their lesson, providing supplementary resources, step-by-step directions, and or links to instructional videos on the Schoology platform to support the students who are home on quarantine. Prior to the board recommendation, all ACPS teachers were required to post their assignments on Schoology, and if a student did not have connectivity and a hotspot could not resolve the issue, then hard copies of the assignments were provided to the student who is absent during a quarantine. In addition to that requirement, the ACPS is piloting the following. If a teacher has a student or students absent due to a quarantine, the teacher at the elementary level is recording, at a minimum, the focused or direct instruction of his or her lesson for ELA and mathematics, or providing a video link for the students that correlates with the lesson, or providing step-by-step instructions that would replicate what a recording or a video link would provide to the students. At the middle school level, it's very similar. They're either recording at a minimum the focused or direct instruction, or they're providing a video link, or they're providing step-by-step instructions in the 4 content areas. In the creative arts classes or the fine arts classes, the teachers are recording the focused instruction or providing a video link when it is necessary to completing the assignment or projects, and extra support is necessary for the student to successfully complete that project or that assignment. Our school-based administrators were provided with this information and the guidelines, and they were tasked with sharing that information with their staff. The pilot was implemented on October 11th, yesterday, and will continue through October 22nd. By the end of the month, all principals will have met with their faculty to gather input and feedback regarding these challenges and the success of the pilot. And then we will use that information to evaluate any additional steps or actions that will need to take place to provide additional instructional support for our students.
Are there any questions for Dr. Caldwell regarding the quarantine? Ms. Fraley?
You stated middle school. I'm assuming it was all secondary, right? Middle and high school is doing the same thing for core subjects, and then non-core subjects is just the recording or a video link for high school too, or is the pilot only elementary and middle?
No, it's for elementary, middle, and high. And middle and high would be considered they're both doing the exact same thing. The recording is for the 4 content areas, or the link, or the step-by-step instructions. And then at the middle level, it's called creative arts. And then at the high school level, it's basically called fine arts. They are providing that additional support through the recording or the step-by-step instructions or the instructional video link if it's necessary to complete a project or an assignment.
My only additional question is for testing when a student is on quarantine during a potential quiz or test during that same time frame. You know, if they were out for 10 days and there happened to be a quiz or a test during the time that they're in quarantine, are there options to take that test either online or when they get back without penalty?
Well, the teacher definitely has the autonomy there to, if it is allowed, to take the quiz via the Schoology platform, or the student can obviously take it when they return from the absences.
Ms. Frank?
For clarification again, you said prior to our last board meeting that many of the teachers have been doing this already. Am I understanding that right now they all are doing one of these 3 things for every class? Either a recording, a video link, or step-by-step instructions?
Well, for elementary, it's for ELA and mathematics. Those 2 content areas, we're asking them to provide that additional student support. And then for middle and high, we're asking for in the 4 content areas, and then as needed in the areas of fine arts and creative arts.
So right now, at middle and high, they're doing it in those core content areas.
That's correct.
So one of those 3 things is available.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions regarding the quarantine? Yep, Mr. Blank?
Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge the leadership and collaboration from Dr. Caldwell and our administrators, and from the very beginning stages in putting this together, collaboration working with Mrs. Sloan and Mr. Gates from the beginning to make this as successful as possible, aiming at making sure the students are getting as much instruction as they can when they're in quarantine. So I just wanted to say thank you and acknowledge the hard work that's been done to put this together so that we can move forward.
Ms. Fraley?
If a parent or community member is concerned about their student and their ability to get to one of these three things, who should they contact and how?
Well, they can contact the teacher via the Schoology platform, or they can contact the school-level administrator, the principal, or they can contact the school counselor at each school.
And to clarify, or to step into this a little further, there are some students who don't have connectivity. So the group has actually tried to think of every possibility that we can. So those who don't, we have hotspots at the school to be checked out, like a library book, to make an example. And when they come back, they return it. So when they're on quarantine, they have the ability to use Schoology if they don't have connectivity. And then when they return, they take care. If the hotspot, and we know some places it doesn't work, we'll do the packets. We'll do the best we can. So it's been well thought out. So.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the quarantine process? Okay, at this time, I think go ahead and move on with the virtual learning option. Thank you.
Okay, so the last item is the virtual option for secondary schools, grades 7 through 12. We investigated the potential of offering a virtual program for those grade levels. Currently, we have a blended virtual program for students in K through grade 6. We do not have the staffing capacity to offer a virtual program locally with our own teachers, and it is not the plan of ACPS to require concurrent teaching because of the difficulties it presented for our students and our faculty. We had a phone conference with the MSDE about virtual programming options, and we reviewed a couple of companies that offer a virtual program that other districts in Maryland are using. It's important to keep in mind that companies are having serious staffing problems as a result of trying to meet the high demand for virtual learning across the country. One company that we explored is having some serious staffing issues, and they actually sent us communication that they would not have any availability here in the near future. MSDE also contacted us and told us that that particular company had overpromised and underdelivered. So the other company we reviewed was Apex. We currently use Apex to offer online courses for recovery credits or individual courses as needed. Apex does offer a virtual academy. We had a phone conference with their sales rep, and the following are important factors to consider if determining that a secondary option is feasible for the ACPS. They are also having staffing issues. They are in the process of hiring additional teachers and can only offer reduced offerings. Teachers may not be Maryland certified, but they are certified as a teacher in a different state. They can provide the blended model that MSDE requires, which is at least 20% of the instruction must be synchronous with a live teacher. Students would have both an asynchronous work and a regular time frame that they would meet with a live teacher. And they have to be on their computers and in their classes during the regular school day, just like our in-person students are. Apex does not offer special education support or accommodations. This would have to be offered by the ACPS, and this would be very challenging due to the staffing needs that we already have in our schools. Apex is unable to offer every course, so a student may not be able to replicate his or her current schedule. A particular challenge for them right now are AP courses, honors level courses, and certain electives. Apex does believe it can provide up to 50 to 100 seats, but it would be offered on a first-come, first-served basis, and they are also working with other school districts in Maryland. The program is for a regular school year, and it is a full-day program, just as for our in-person students. The students would not begin at the beginning of the course but would start where the pacing currently is for that course for this time of the school year. If the program is offered, the student would not be eligible to participate in extracurricular activities or athletics. For state testing or other mandatory testing, a student would have to come to the school site during the testing administration. And this is extremely important because when we're talking about high school courses, students have to meet certain graduation requirements, and participating in state assessments is one of those requirements. And students will still be held to the same attendance requirements that other high school students have, and they must be able to pass specific coursework in order to meet their graduation requirements. Failing a course in the APEX Academy would mean that they would have to recover the credit either in after-school recovery or in summer school. So that really gives you an overview of what we could possibly offer and some of the challenges surrounding that particular academy.
Questions for Dr. Caldwell? One question I have is MSD, I'm assuming they recommended this company. What kind of implications does it have if some of the teachers are not Maryland certified?
Well, they approved it because they have certified teachers. It's just that they're not Maryland certified. So, because they have students from around the country potentially in this academy, just not Maryland students.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Dr. Caldwell, we're outsourcing this program, so you're not in a class with students that you're not most likely not going to be familiar with the students. Like you said, they have students from all over. But as far as our work force, even though it's outsourced, could you just touch a little bit on, not in detail, but all the reporting? I want everybody to realize the MSDE requirements, even though it's outsourced.
Yes, you were correct about the first item you mentioned, that when they are in the live synchronous classroom, it could be from students from other districts in Maryland or other states in Maryland. So it's not just going to be specific to the ACPS. And then there are reporting requirements from the MSDE for any virtual blended program that you offer. We just had to submit a report for the elementary blended program on Friday, and they have given us a schedule of when the reporting has to be due throughout the year. And just like we had last year, we have to do marking period reporting on everything again for all of our metrics again, just like we did last year. But yes, there will be a separate report specific to the blended learning programs, and the MSDE actually asks for specific information on each child in the program because they want to be able to see if those students are attending and being successful.
I'm asking that question to get guidance from the board. If we do offer this program, if you decide to offer this program, are there will it be, if there are so many students, we run the program? Because whether there's a handful or whether there's 30, it's still going to require an amount of work from staff. So my reason for asking the question, so that as we're moving forward, is there a limit? That's what I'm asking the board, because we don't know how many students are interested in it, and I have no idea. There may be quite a few students, there may be very few students, but is there a limit, just like we do with our regular class sizes when we're doing staffing? So I'd like you to consider that when you make a motion to move forward, if you decide to move forward, that's all.
I think this discussion wasn't born out of hundreds and hundreds of people wanting a virtual option. Although listening to Mr. Chowdhury, the state superintendent this past week, we've got to, at some point down the road, nationwide, invest in online education because it will work better for some, but we're not there. I think the discussion, and when I brought it up in last month's meeting, was more of a concern about the people the 100 to 200 students who were quarantined for many an excessive long period of time, and how we were providing support. And I agree with you, many teachers, and I did hear that from some of these parents, many teachers were uploading videos, turning the camera on while they were in class so a student could watch it later, but it wasn't all. And we were getting a lot of very frustrated parents and frustrated students who only got a posted assignment with nothing else with it. So, when I wanted a conversation about what options do we have, it was really to help predominantly those folks. I do get a couple people wanting online education, but it's really not that. It's really doing the best we can at providing support to the students, particularly in the quarantine situation. I was glad to hear from Ms. Mayer that if a student is fully vaccinated, they don't quarantine unless they're symptomatic, obviously. Again, and I'll use this as my soapbox moment, I would urge parents to have that conversation at your house and get your kids vaccinated. The parents still aren't there. We're still at 45% in this county compared to 65% statewide. So many of these problems that we're discussing could be eliminated by increasing the vaccination rate. But until then, as long as you can give me that assurance that teachers are doing this, that we're not just posting assignments in the air that a student is supposed to figure out, then I'm perfectly happy not recommending that academy, but yet providing more concentrated support for the folks who are quarantined.
Ms. Fraley?
And I would agree with Ms. Frank in the discussion that we had last month. It was for those that were in quarantine. And so with this pilot of offering additional support, or instructional support, I think that will resolve most of the issues. I think that what we need to do for sure is make sure that it's communicated out to the public at all schools what the process is, so that those parents maybe even give it to them when their kid is quarantined, right? They get only because I've seen it from my own kid. You get a piece of paper that says how long you're quarantined for. At the same time, give them a piece of paper that explains what they need to do when they are in quarantine. That may alleviate much of the concern of parents that have their kids in quarantine, because you can't always trust a high school student to tell you as a parent what the process is. So I think that would help, because like Deb said, I know that there are teachers that were already doing it. It was more of the ones that weren't that was the concern.
Any other comments or questions for Dr. Caldwell or Mr. Blank? We can just move on. There's no.
So just so staff is clear, then we will move forward with the pilot and make adjustments as we hear from staff and community, whatever adjustments we need to make as we move forward with the making sure instructions given to the quarantine students. And right now, I'm understanding that the virtual program is on hold because it doesn't meet the, well, you heard the presentation, so is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think it sounds like quite a good fit. They're not able to offer. I don't know that we're going to have a lot of interest with those restrictions in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. At this time, we will hear from Mr. McKenzie with a finance update.
Good evening. In your packets this evening, you will find a summary of COVID aid relief spending from...
Mr. McKenzie, can we either have you speak up or maybe move the mic a little closer?
Okay.
Thank you.
So this evening, in your packets, you should have a summary of COVID aid relief spending. Okay. This report outlines the grant name, the grant status, the grant award, as well as spending to date for a certain period of time, in this case 9/31 of 21, and the amount, the balance left to be spent. Okay. As I'd previously mentioned, as we've talked about these grants, the spending of these funds is really very similar to putting the pieces of a puzzle together. Okay, so as you can see, there are 15 grants listed, several beginning with differing beginning and ending expiration dates, okay, as well as several usage stipulations in terms of how these funds can be utilized. Okay. As a result, for instance, some charges initially charged to the first grant, the CARES ESSER 1 grant, were reclassified to the CARES tutoring grant as a result of that expense being allowed in either grant. However, because of the timeline for the tutoring grant being much shorter, we've moved some of those funds over there. Okay, and it fits in both places. But what we're trying to do is, again, piece this puzzle together to maximize our grant funds. Okay, so of the 15 grants, 3 have expired that were all fully spent: CARES Technology, CARES Tutoring, and the Broadband for Unserved Students. There are 3 grants that are expiring 9/30 of 22, which total almost $3 million, $2,916,304, of which $55,385 remain, or about 1.9% of those remain to be spent. So we're very confident those will be spent as well here. The CARES ESSER 2 grant expires on 9/30 of 23, and you can tell there that we still have a little over $7 million to spend over the next 2 years. And you'll also see that next to the CARES ESSER 3 grant that's pending, and it has had its initial review with MSDE, and we've met with them, and Dr. Caldwell and myself, and have responded to the request for additional and clarifying information, as well as the correlation to our reopening plan document. I would anticipate that that'll probably be approved here in the next, prior to the next meeting. So overall, you can see that of the $45,641,000 that we're anticipating, approximately $10.5 million of that has been spent so far. Does anyone have any questions?
Ms. Fraley?
Just for clarification, what is the ARP versus ESSER? We've seen the ESSER, CARES ESSER 1 and CARES ESSER 2, but then now there's it says ARP?
That's the American Recovery Plan. So that was, I believe that one came along in January, I believe, was whenever it.
And just because I'm an accountant, since it's pending, you're able to spend it because your confidence level of receiving it is high. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And not only that, we also knew that it would fit with the CARES ESSER 2 grant that had been already approved. So if for some reason it wouldn't be approved, we could move those expenses there.
Ms. Fraley? Or, I'm
As
sorry,
a
Ms. Fraley.
non-accountant, I see a balance still of $7 million from CARES ESSER 2, and I'm just curious why we've spent $900,000 on the pending, or from the pending grant, and haven't touched the $7 million that's still there from ESSER's 2.
Well, what we would have to do, what we spent from CARES ESSER 3 was, if you recall, the board approved the air purifiers. So the air purifiers, the way the grant was initially written for CARES ESSER 2, while it would be an acceptable expense, we would have had to provide an amended document based upon the financial category that we would be spending those funds from. So it is absolutely eligible to be spent from ESSER 2. It's just that whenever the grant was initially written, it wasn't written for those items.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Any other questions? Ms. Fraley?
Of these supplemental grants that are at the bottom of this page that started in March of 21 and go through 24, have we as a school system designated what we're going to be using them for, unless, of course, there's one's called tutoring grant, so obviously that's for tutoring. But are any of these other ones, like the school reopening one, for example, or are there things that we've already, as a board, may have already said yes to, much like the air purifiers that are part of these? Or is this money that we still need to determine how we're going to use it?
We have put forth an application for those, and for things that we know we're gonna need. In the instance of the supplemental AR, the summer school, obviously those will be for summer school cost as we move forward. And again, we also have summer school cost in a couple of the other grants. So trying to piece together the best way to spend those funds in the most, so we don't want to leave any money on the table. So, and then in the instance of the 22 grants, they are pending because while the application has been submitted, MSDE is still in the process of, they want to get the ARP grants, everyone's ARP grants approved first, so they're still pending. But I put those together with the idea of knowing that we would need certain things, as we move forward. Certainly the behavioral health specialist in some of the in the summer school is an ongoing grant.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. McKenzie? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. The other thing I did want to mention, the Fy21 audit is ongoing, and we've been in touch with Huber Michaels as well as county government, obviously letting them know where we stand as well. So we're working as quickly as possible to get that wrapped up as well.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we will move into our hearing of constituents. I believe we have one person signed up to speak, Ms. Lori Lepley, and just a reminder that comments are limited to 5 minutes, please.
The first thing I'd like to point out is vaccination has been.
I'm sorry, can you speak up just a little bit?
Yes. The first thing I'd like to point out is it's been indicated that vaccination is going to help our rates. And while that may be, there are areas all over the country right now with higher vaccination rates than we have that are also experiencing surges. And the South is now coming down from their surges, and they have traditionally lower vaccination rates. So this could be seasonal, it could be other things. There are also other countries, Singapore being the most recent one, who has an 85% vaccination rate with exponential cases right now. So I just want to put that out there. When you've got children that are not really affected by COVID, they're very low risk for it, deciding to get a vaccination that is new is not an easy decision. And it feels like the quarantine policy kind of discriminates against that. It kind of puts children, it puts parents in a position of having to decide whether or not they're going to be quarantined even though they're completely healthy. And now it's down to 7 days, it was 10 days, and possibly 20 days if you had another family member quarantining. But that's not an easy decision, and it puts pressure on parents, it puts pressure on students to possibly take something, a vaccine that has not been fully tested, especially in children. So I think that it's hard, I don't know what I want to say here really, but I feel like the quarantine policy really puts pressure on parents and children to make that decision. And there are lots of other districts around the country, and private schools especially, that are not fully following CDC guidelines. And they are modifying it to different extents. Some minor things are modified. Some are allowing students to just test out, rapid testing out of quarantine. And some are doing if you're sick, you stay home. And you don't have to stay home unless you're actively showing symptoms of anything. And the loss of learning with the quarantining, I mean, it's massive. And I know that there was one mom, which I'm surprised she wasn't here tonight, who had a son, or I guess it was her son, who's been home for 30 days for quarantine. He hasn't been sick yet. I had one child at the beginning of the school year that was in the public school system. We pulled all of our children out, and he wanted to stay in because he wanted to see his friends. And we felt that his mental health was more important than taking a stand. So we allowed
Ms.
him
Lepley, if you
to
don't
go.
mind maybe leaning forward a little bit more, you're starting to trail
I'm
off.
sorry.
I can't quite hear everything.
Okay, we
Thank
had,
you.
we pulled all of our children from the public school system except one. He wanted to stay so he could be with his friends. And we felt that his mental health was more important than taking a stand. And he soon realized that the masking and the 3 feet distance, it wasn't worth it. But before we finally pulled him, he was caught up in the quarantine. And it was over allergy symptoms. And so we had to get him a rapid test because I didn't want to take chances with the PCR test because there is a high false positive or a high clinical false positive rate with those. So we had to pay $189 for a rapid test for allergy symptoms that I knew was not COVID. And so now he was a statistic for the county, and he was considered a quarantine student, and he was considered a COVID symptom student. And I see the numbers that the Board of Education is putting out with the quarantined students and the symptoms, and I don't think that's data that doesn't have any meaning because it could be a sniffle, it could be a cough. The quarantine policy, I believe, is abusive. Parents and students are obsessing over every cough and sniffle, and then children are forced to stay home for long periods of time. And the one that amazed me the most was the 20-day, where if a sibling is also, or another family member is also being quarantined, the student has to wait and start their quarantine on the family member's 10th day. And I mean, what are the chances that that student is actually going to catch COVID from their family member on the 10th day, and then they have to quarantine an additional 10 days? So the loss of learning and the pressure, the pressure from the vaccine, the pressure from, if your child sneezes and you're afraid to send them to school, it's a lot on parents and children. But I'd like to read testimony from Amy Hoeg, who testified before Congress, I believe in September, but she is an MD and a PhD in epidemiology who is studying COVID in children. So I am a Danish American and have observed over the last year and a half strikingly different strategies between Denmark and the United States when it comes to prioritizing the overall well-being of children. Denmark reopened schools after 6 weeks of initial lockdown before the rest of the economy in April of 2020, and almost without exception kept them open and have only had 2 pediatric deaths in the entire country. Sports and extracurricular activities have also been kept open, and normalcy to the greatest extent possible in children's lives have been a national priority in Denmark since the start of the pandemic. In the United States, unfortunately, prolonged school closures have led to learning loss, isolation, obesity, and mental health problems in children, disproportionately affecting socioeconomically disadvantaged children. None of this appears to have spared them from the negative impacts of COVID-19 either. In my view, the United States' single-minded, myopic approach to the pandemic has created a myriad of public health problems for children beyond that of COVID-19. And I feel that our country's failure to do risk-benefit analysis, as well as good scientific studies of the interventions that we impose on the children to mitigate one disease, has created numerous additional and avoidable public health crises in our youth. For a disease that relatively spares them, this generation has suffered an incredible amount during the pandemic, and unfortunately, the effects of this will likely travel with them for the rest of their lives. I would request that we take a more common sense approach to all this, and I think in an overabundance of caution, CDC guidelines is overkill, and I think our children are suffering from it. My children would love more than nothing else than to go back to school with their friends, and it's just not possible at this time. And I don't think it's healthy for them, and I'm not going to submit them to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lepley. Are there any board member responses? No. First, under new business, we have consider first reading of the Code of Ethics policy. Mr. Llewellyn.
The agenda has three policies and one regulation for your review tonight. The policy committee, these all go together, and here's how. The policy committee was asked to compare and review the code of ethics the board follows with the nepotism policy and staff ethics policies and the regulation to the for staff ethics. So these were all reviewed together. So that's the result of that is the changes you have before you. As you know, policy BCA is the code of ethics for the board. The only real changes that the policy committee recommends for that one is on the first page, and that is to, at the top under purpose, to add and applicable employees to the purpose, and that's because they wanted to clarify, give more clarity to whom this policy applies to, and that would be the Board of Education, the elected board, and the superintendent pursuant to the policy. That's the only identified school system employee that this applies to, and so we wanted to add that and applicable employees to bring that to light. There's also just an update, and really this would not require a board vote, but the ethics law is no longer under the state government article, it's now under the general provisions article. So that's just an update of where that law can be found. So those are the only changes to BCA.
So you need a motion on the top sentence to approve, or no motion at all?
Yeah, we need a motion to approve basically those three words at the top.
Okay. Ms. Frank? I'm sorry, were you going to say the same thing? I saw. Okay, is there a motion to approve the policy?
I'll make a motion to approve the policy.
Motion by Mr. Farrell, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Fraley. Discussion. Ms. Frank?
I'm just wondering why we say and applicable employees instead of just the superintendent. If that's the intended applicable employee, why would we leave that so vague?
We didn't discuss it that way. The board could choose at some point in time to add employees. So if you turn back to the back, it's the 3 pages in from the back, under 3, financial disclosures, employees, and appointed officials. And then it says this section only applies to the following appointed officials and employees, and we list the superintendent of schools. It is plausible that at some date in the future, this board or another board could decide to expand that list to other high-ranking officials in the school system. So I think just because of the way that it's structured was the reason why we used a more generalized term.
I would request, though, that we change that, because if another board wants to add somebody later, I think that makes sense. But if all you're talking about to this board is the superintendent and this board, then I would strongly suggest that we say superintendent, period.
Ms. Fraley?
I could offer another suggestion as well, as we have the staff ethics policy, that you could move the superintendent of schools, section 3, underneath the staff ethics policy, and then thereby the Board of Education Code of Ethics, which is BCA, which is specific to the elected board before, other than that one section. And I think it just got held over, really, because this was 4 years ago. This was a a policy and then regulations, but since it was board, specific to the board, the regulations were put into the policy because you don't have regulations. I know that Washington County, for example, has a separate policy and then regulations for the policy, even though it's for the Board of Education. So I think that it would be more clear and maybe suffice for what Ms. Frank's asking for, to move that section of financial disclosures for the superintendent, because the financial disclosure for the Board of Education members is not that section. It's further up in the policy. So that financial disclosure number 3 that says employees and appointed officials, it's really just the superintendent. So that would be my option. So I think that with that said, that rather, I don't know how, before we've already had discussion of whether you pass the first reading and send it back to policy for the second, or you don't pass the first reading and send it back.
I will caution you when we get that far, and I think we can add to the purpose the language we talked about. If we separate that out, I think we may need approval by the State Ethics Commission. They review all ethics policies of local government bodies, which includes the Board of Education. That would be a fairly substantive change to your policy and would require probably the State Ethics Commission's approval. I'm not saying they would withhold that approval, but that would be a process that it would have to go through before your final approval of the policy or before it became effective. Policy committee could look at it, but I'm just letting you know there's more to that than just 2 votes, if that's what the direction you're going to go into.
Any other discussion? There is a motion and a second then. Is all those in favor consider passing the first reading of the Code of Ethics policy? Opposed? Motion passes 3-2. Dr. Bond was included in the 3 to vote to pass, for the record. Thank you.
Point of clarification, this discussion that would go for the second reading, will it go back to the policy committee or just come here directly?
That's up to the board. The board can vote to send it back to policy committee for further consideration or not.
So I would make a motion to send policy BCA as amended from the first reading to define applicable employees either in the definition itself or change the purpose to say and the superintendent.
Is there, I'm sorry, did you say second? Second by Ms. Frank. Any discussion? Mr. Farrell?
Mr. Llewellyn, if it goes back to policy committee for that reconsideration, does it have to come back then for a first reading, or can we go ahead and move forward with whatever happens?
If there's a substantive change, for example, if you did what Ms. Fraley asked for, that would be such a large change that it would probably require another first reading. If it's just the change that Ms. Frank alluded to, you probably could get that done on a second reading with this policy, because it means the same thing. It's not really substantive. So it kind of depends on what the policy committee does with it. If they get into it and they totally reconstruct it, obviously it's not even close to what the board passed to on first reading, so it would need another first reading. It would be like a new idea, essentially. Does that make sense?
Ms. Fraley?
My suggestion now, after hearing from him and what the motion was just to go back to policy specifically about applicable employees and then either change the purpose or just define it, which is not, I wouldn't think, a substantive change. Is just defining what was already there.
Yeah, I concur with that.
So you think we can do that and then come back for a second reading if it conforms to what Ms. Fraley said?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion and the second is to now to send the first read back for clarification on that first line, correct? All those in favor? Opposed? Dr. Bond, are you voting? I can't hear him, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I had my thing. So
In
I'm
favor or
can you hear
opposed?
me? I'm opposed.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes 4-1.
The next is the nepotism policy. The policy committee reviewed this and recommended the changes. Obviously, the strikeouts are deletions. The highlighted is new language. The biggest change was as it related to who is a qualified relative. I think that the committee, I think it's safe to say they were a little surprised at how expansive that was. And there was a lot of discussion about the number of employees who couldn't be employed because of such an expansive definition of qualified relative. So the definition that the policy committee recommends changing that to follows the same definition found in the ethics law, which is spouse, parent, child, or sibling. And then the removal of some stringent language that the policy committee felt was too stringent for the hiring of employees. And so you see some strike-throughs there about, if they're a family member of the superintendent or a member of the board not being able to be hired, and how to handle when somebody comes in a situation under D, how to handle that situation. And so that's the policy committee recommends those changes. In addition, the exhibit to the policy, we checked with HR, and this has never been used and wouldn't be determined to be useful. And so it's recommended that be struck entirely or repealed as an exhibit as just being unnecessary.
Is there a motion to approve the changes to the nepotism policy?
I make a motion that we approve this on the first, read it for the first reading.
Motion by Mr. Farrow. Is there a second?
Second,
Second by Dr. Bond. Any discussion?
of course.
Sorry. I'm really concerned with the striking of F underneath the standards that says board members and employees may not vote or take action involving the employment, assignment, promotion, etc. And it said immediate family member, even if we change that to qualified relative. I think that that's imperative to be in the nepotism policy so that it's clear that board members and employees who have the ability to take that type of action should recuse themselves if they have that, because it does say that you can, they must disqualify themselves from every proceeding or vote, especially if it's a qualified relative that's being considered for employment, assignment, or promotion, or change in pay. I think that should stay there because that was the purpose of the nepotism policy. And then secondly, the I on the back, where it doesn't allow an exception, which would be because there is no need for an exception because you can hire anybody other than these relatives that are listed, which is, for those in the audience, is only the spouse, the parent, the child, or a sibling. So no other relative outside of your immediate family is considered now, instead of having things such as your brother or sister. And I think the nepotism policy, the intent of the nepotism policy is to ensure that we're ethical in our behavior on the part of the board members and employees in evaluating personnel. And I think that we need to be very clear on what that ethical behavior is. Thank you.
I would like to reiterate and maybe add some clarification to what Ms. Fraley just said. We're being asked to approve removing the statement that board members and employees may not vote or take action involving employment, assignment, promotion, compensation, discipline, suspension, or dismissal of a qualified relative. So we're being asked to say that that's okay, and I am with Ms. Fraley. It was my understanding that the whole point of a nepotism policy was that somebody on this board would have to recuse themselves if a relative who happened to work in the school system were being considered for termination or a promotion or extra compensation. So I'm not comfortable with a policy that doesn't address that. So I would strongly recommend that this go back to the policy committee for further conversations.
Mr. Llewellyn, can you clarify in policy meeting, maybe I should remember this, but why that was struck out and if it's referenced anywhere else and that's why we took it out, or what the conversation was?
I don't specifically remember F. I know that board members already would be required to not vote to under BCA for qualified relatives. They wouldn't be able to vote to hire a qualified relative, and I can't remember the rest of the conversation around that at the committee meeting. So but that's and I think that GBEA may cover the employees, but you can also, without sending it back to policy committee, if you wanted to, if it's simple and unstriking a certain provision, then you can do that right here on the floor if you want to. So it's whatever the board's prerogative.
Ms. Fraley.
I would consider that we change the nepotism policy because we've been told multiple times that the Code of Ethics BCA is only related to the financial conflict of interest. And in some cases, the transfer of a family member is not a financial interest of the board member, but it's still a financial interest of their family. So that wouldn't be covered underneath BCA because it wouldn't be a financial gain for the person that's being covered by the Code of Ethics.
No, it is. You can't vote to enrich one way or another a qualified relative under BCA. Matter of fact, that's the foundation of the state ethics law, is that you can't take an action as an elected official that would impact the legal economic interest of your qualified relative, and obviously yourself. But it does provide for that.
So is qualified relative spelled out in BCA, since we changed the definition of qualified relative
Yes.
in BCC? Is it the same in BCA?
Yeah, and it's straight out of state law. It's under B1 of BCA, and it says in this section, qualified relative means a spouse, parent, child, or sibling.
So is it an option then, if I understand this correctly, to approve this other than unstrike F and send that back for clarification onto why that was crossed out?
Yeah, if somebody could make a motion to amend the motion to approve it without striking F, that would be an effective way to move forward, and that would be your first reading. And if we could take, the policy committee could look at it, provide any feedback, but barring no feedback, if you came to second reading, F would be uncrossed out, and then you could approve it that way.
I can move that, but in looking at this, I also think we need to unstrike the definition of nepotism. Every other policy would define the content about which we are addressing the policy.
Yeah,
so-
that's funny because there's a definition for nepotism, and then nepotism is not used in the entire policy. That's why we struck it, because we were defining a word we weren't using.
Okay. Well, then how do we do this? Can I just make a motion to amend this and unstrike F?
Yeah, you make a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor to approve it, unstriking F, and that would get it done.
Okay, then I will make that motion.
Okay, is there a second to Ms. Frank's motion?
Second.
Second by Ms. Fraley. All those in favor? Opposed? Dr. Bond, are you voting? I can't hear him.
What's the vote? I didn't see anybody vote.
Okay, so we're on the nepotism policy. The motion is to approve it, but unstrike
Yeah.
letter F and send that back to the policy committee for verification as to why that was struck out.
And for point of clarification, you're on the motion to amend the original motion, and you'll come
Okay.
back to the original.
Are you in favor or opposed?
In favor.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. The amended motion passes unanimously.
So now you're back on the original motion as amended. We'll take one more vote.
Original motion as amended. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Next is GBEA, which is a staff ethics policy, and it just, part of our review of these policies, we found again that our discrimination language in this policy didn't get captured when we were adjusting all of our other non-discrimination policies. So this is kind of like a non-discrimination policy within an ethics policy. So this would, the only change that is recommended is to add the language highlighted, which would make it consistent with all the policies you guys passed over the past 2 months. There's no other change recommended.
Is there a motion to approve the staff ethics policy?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Farrell, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Fraley. Any discussion? Ms. Frank?
And I know that we've had this conversation before, but I find it bothersome that staff ethics include quite a bit of policy about morality. And that does not exist, and I understand, I mean, you've said before, because we're elected officials, there's a different definition of ethics. But I'm just bothered that the same kinds of things that we expect staff to uphold, like never using one's position for inappropriate treatment of others, or never use your position for personal gain, or maintain confidentiality of privileged information, that's required of staff in the system, but not required of board members. That's been a concern I've shared multiple times. I understand from Mr. Llewellyn that would take going to the state to get them to change the ethics policy, but you know, according to Mr. Llewellyn, ethics to us just means a financial gain. It doesn't have anything to do with morality. We could be discriminating against people left and right, and none of that is part of board behaviors or the board's ethical policy or ethics policy. So I just wanted to make that public.
Well, to be clear, I didn't say you could discriminate against people. So there's other laws against that. My point was, yeah, employees are different than elected board members, and I think what I told you was, well, if you act immorally, there's elections, but employees aren't elected, so they have to have these standards of conduct, and this is pretty standard employment law stuff. So,
Any other discussion? There is a motion and a second. All those in favor of considering the first reading of staff ethics policy? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
This last one is GBEA R1. This is a regulation, so it just requires no vote, only a review. And we're just adjusting that who's a qualified relative and making it consistent across the board that it's spouse, parent, child, or sibling. And that's the only change recommended for this regulation. You don't have to vote on it unless you want to send it back to policy committee as a rejection.
Is there any discussion regarding the regulation? Okay, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to table E and F. E is consider first reading of board communication policy, and F, because it's related, approval of amendments to the board handbook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Fraley. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. At this time, Mr. Wilson will be coming down to discuss the MOU with the ACAA.
Good evening. One of the things that you have in your packet is a memorandum of understanding that we would like to enter into from the board, with the Allegany County Education Association. A very brief history that last year the Family First Coronavirus Act provided COVID leave for individuals with COVID issues. That law sunsetted in December of last year, and when we started this year, with our employment for our teachers, anyone who had a COVID-related issue had to use accrued sick leave in order to be off with COVID-related issues. One of the things that we found that has popped up, which we didn't foresee, was that through no fault of their own, employees who have been fully vaccinated, have done what they've needed to do, wearing their masks, maintaining distance, they still may become positive, COVID positive, and have to quarantine. The MOU that you have in front of you talks about that, in which we would allow those fully vaccinated individuals through the ACEA, their members, and other employees to be able to not have to use accrued leave, that we would allow them to use administrative leave for any COVID positive situation that they may be contracted through work-related contact and exposure as determined by the Allegany County Health Department and the contact tracing that they do. So that's the basic of the memorandum of understanding that we have in front of you tonight. It's basically done because it's a slight change and it does impact benefits and salaries. So we wanted to put that for your review, and I'll see if you would be willing to approve that.
Is there a motion to approve the MOU as discussed by Mr. Wilson?
So I'd like to make the motion to approve the MOU between ACPS and ACEA.
Okay, thank you.
Second?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Frank, second by Ms. Fraley. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
At this time, can I have a motion to meet in executive session as necessary on November the 9th, 2021? Motion by Ms. Frank, second. Second by Ms. Fraley. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. At this time, do we have an update from Ms. Noel?
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I'd just like to talk about a little bit about CASE, which is the Allegany County Association of Student Councils. So we're a little bit behind compared to other counties in the state, but we have begun the election process for our executive board. Right now, I'm the only member of the executive board, but following election, which is taking place this week, we should have a full board. Positions include president, vice president, parliamentarian, public relations officer, and secretary, and then, of course, me as student member of the board. So each middle and high school is delegated a certain amount of votes based on population that they can cast towards the candidate for each position. And once we establish this executive board, we can begin to have meetings, discuss plans for general assemblies of all student councils in the county, as well as plan community service projects and just really build a strong sense of community with the student councils in the county. So I look really forward to seeing how the election goes and working with the members of the executive board. As for just like some observation things throughout the community, I'm really pleased that we talked about it here tonight, but one of the big issues that was brought to my attention numerous times was about the quarantine work. With the massive numbers of students that we had out on quarantine and continue to have out on quarantine, without online instruction that we've had with an actual teacher talking to a student, many have said to have struggled with comprehending and following assignments due to the lack of actual instruction. Many have had difficulty completing assignments in classes such as math and upper level classes. It's very difficult to really know where to start without proper instruction. So that's been brought to my attention on numerous occasions. So you can imagine I'm very pleased to hear about this instructional support program that we are beginning to implement. I think that'll be fantastic and will really provide the support that our students need through these tough times. Along with that, I would just like to note that I feel like because of the massive amounts of quarantining that we've seen, I feel like there is really a strong push and a larger population of students who are having the conversation to get vaccinated to prevent these mass quarantines, because it's detrimental, especially those involved in extracurricular activities and sports, athletics. It's very important to not be quarantined. So I would just urge people to continue to have this conversation. I know I speak for many when I say that I would like to return back to normalcy, but I'm very pleased that we're continuing to see these conversations, and hopefully our vaccination rate can increase so we have a little bit more ease of mind. But yeah, that's basically all I have. Thank you for recognizing me at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Noel. Are there any board member updates at this time? Okay, at this time, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Farrell, second. Second by Ms. Frank. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Have a good night.